Hi, this is Vivian Young with 1000 Friends of Florida, and I'd like to welcome you all to our November webinar, Planning for Complete Streets in Florida. A little bit of audio options. You can either use your computer's audio, which will work in automatically, or you can select the telephone icon and use your handheld telephone for that. Let's move on here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about 1000 Friends of Florida. The organization was founded in 1986. It's a statewide not-for-profit membership organization, and our mission we focus on saving special places and building better communities. We do a lot to try to spread word on good planning practices and growth management strategies in Florida. We encourage you to sign up for our email alerts, which are available online at 1000friendsoflorida.org/alerts. We are a nonprofit, so we appreciate donations. We're also active on Facebook and Twitter, and we encourage you to follow us there and find out more about our activities. The webinars are made possible thanks to some important sponsors. The Archibald Foundation and Mosaic are generous supporters of the program. We also receive generous support from Cobb and Cole, the Perkins Charitable Foundation, the William Howard Flowers Foundation, as well as the American Planning Association Florida Chapter, Ronald Book, Dover Cole and Partners, Kitson Evergreen, and Thompson Brock Luger and Company. This webinar has been approved for professional credits, 1.5 credits for planners, 1.5 contact hours for certified environmental health professionals, 1 credit for certified floodplain managers, and CLE for Florida attorneys. We also post this information on our website. If you go to the page where the webinars are listed, there's an icon up top that will direct you to where the credits are if you don't get a chance to write the information down here. This is part of a monthly webinar series, and we do have a number of upcoming webinars planned. Our next one is Wednesday, December 10th, and it's Planning for Greenways, Florida's Expanding System of Regional Connectors. That link is live, so you can start registering for it now, and we encourage you to do that. Then in January, we're having another webinar on planning for sea level rise, legal issues facing Florida. In February, we're very pleased that Victor Dover of Dover Cole has agreed to do a presentation on his new book, Street Design, The Secret to Great Cities and Towns, with a focus on Florida-specific examples. And in March, we will have our annual legislative update for those of you who are interested in what are promising to be the hot topics during the upcoming legislative session, and we'll have more posted as the year progresses. For those of you who are interested in the PowerPoint, it is available on our website at 1000friendsoflorida.org. If you go under What's New, it doesn't say Planning for Sea Level Rise. It says Planning for Complete Streets in Florida, and there's a link to the PowerPoint there. The link that you were sent with from GoToTraining to join this webinar also has a link to the PowerPoint. So those are 2 different ways you can download a copy of the PowerPoint that's being used today. The biggest feedback we get is issues with sound quality, and we apologize. We do everything possible we can to work with it on our end. We have individual sound checks, we have group sound checks, and we still sometimes seem to have sound issues when we get 4 or 5 people in different parts of the state using different computers. If you are hearing issues, one thing you can do is your computer will have a volume for your speakers, and you can adjust that. Sometimes down a little bit helps to cut out feedback issues, so if you would try that first. The second thing, and actually I probably shouldn't mention this, is you can pause it, but that's more for the speakers than for the participants. The third thing you can do to adjust your sounds is on your control panel, there's an audio button. If you click on it, it will maximize it, and you can do a sound check and see if you can balance anything on your computer. I would do this as a last resort, and I would really just try adjusting your speakers if you are having problems. Again, we do everything possible on our end, but we still sometimes get strange feedback that we can't control. At the end of the webinar, we have an opportunity for questions. We ask you, again, you click on the little plus sign like that, and it becomes a minus, and the chat box will open up, and you can type your message in. You can either send it to everybody, or there's another link you can click that you send it to me privately. At the end of the webinar, we open up everybody's speakers and we ask as many questions as we possibly can. Please try to keep your questions fairly succinct. And if it's directed towards a particular speaker, you can indicate that you'd like Billy Hadaway to discuss this or Darla Letourneau to discuss that, and we'll try to honor that as well. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to Charles Pattison to introduce the presenters. And Charles, are you there?
Yeah, thanks, Vivian. This is Charles. I'm the Policy Director at Thousand Friends, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our complete panel, and then we'll start right into the webinar. First, we have Billy Hadaway is the District Secretary for DOT's District 1. He has 35 years of transportation and program management experience with DOT in the private sector, and he is the personal champion for Secretary Prasad's pedestrian and bicycle-focused initiative for the entire agency, and that's meant to improve pedestrian and bicyclist safety. He chairs the Bike Walk Central Florida, which is a nonprofit dedicated to safety issues there, and his professional experience includes transportation planning, street design, safety and traffic analysis for a wide variety of transportation projects, including redevelopment, transit-oriented development, and master plan charrette projects, all of which is designed to create walkable, bike, and transit-friendly communities. He's also the author of the new Traditional Neighborhood Development Chapter and Handbook for FDOT's Florida Green Book. Next is Amanda Martinez. She is the Director of Planning and Development Services with the City of Deerfield Beach. She's been there for the past 7 years in various capacities, has an undergraduate degree from UCF in Orlando and a master's in urban regional planning from Florida Atlantic. She was critical in securing 2 technical assistance grants from the U.S. EPA and Smart Growth America on using smart growth to produce fiscal and economic health and creating and implementing complete street policies. She was instrumental in assisting the City of Deerfield Beach in adopting complete streets guidelines, and that meant it was the first city in the state to adopt comprehensive complete streets design guidelines. She's a member of American Planning Association and Smart Growth America's Local Leader Council. Next is Darla Letourneau. She has both MPA and an MBA and has a 30-year career as a federal official in Washington with expertise in policy analysis, budget, legislation, and advocacy. And her last position was Deputy Assistant Secretary with U.S. Department of Labor for 8 years. She's a founding member of Bike Walk Lee and serves on its steering group. She also serves on the county's Community Sustainability Advisory Committee, Complete Streets Working Group. She served on the MPO's project teams that developed countywide bicycle and pedestrian master plan and bike ped safety action plan. She has been designated one of Florida Weekly's Power Women and was also recognized as one of the 2014 Makers Women Who Make Southwest Florida. She was named Citizen Advocate of the Year by Florida Bicycle Association in both 2010 and 2014. Next, Laura Cantwell is Associate State Director of Advocacy for AARP, working out of the Tallahassee office. She began her career there in August of 2005 as an advocacy intern with responsibilities now that include health and long-term care, consumer and livable community issues. She previously worked at the Pepper Institute on Aging and Public Policy. She has an undergraduate degree from Lander University and an MS in Aging Studies from Florida State University. So we'll turn it over to Billy Hadaway and get started.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak today. I'm going to be talking about a couple of things. First of all, the Secretary's initiative to improve bike and ped safety, but also going to talking about how we're planning on getting there and incorporating complete streets. So The safety initiative started back in 2011, shortly after the Dangerous by Design report, which was put out by Smart Growth America, and more recently has been updated in 2014, that showed that 4 of our regions were in the top 5 most dangerous places in the country. And when Secretary Prasad announced that I was leading this initiative, he said, you know, being number 1 in pedestrian fatalities and injuries is not a place where we want to excel. And so he asked me to lead and become the champion for this statewide initiative, which started roughly in the spring of 2012. We initially, in addition to those 4 regions, we initially identified 10 counties as our top priority counties, but as we've gone through the data and looked at how trends shift, we've actually gone now to 15 top priority counties as it relates to where we have the greatest problems with pedestrian and bicycle fatalities. So how did we get here? Certainly all of us in the transportation world with our focus on moving cars has contributed significantly to the problems that we have today, both in not having complete streets. As you can see here on Fowler Ave in Tampa, a few years ago I took this picture of a lady walking her twins. There are now sidewalks on this segment of Fowler Ave, but also with cars moving obviously fast because of the size of many of these corridors and related intersections. But there are lots of parts to how this happened, much of which has to do with land development patterns, which our agency does not control. Local governments contribute to this problem over the last 50 or 60 years as more and more development is being, as I describe it, cul-de-saced onto the arterial system, whether it's a state road or a local road. It literally forces every trip by car out onto the arterial to go from where you live to where you work to school, and that's what we call conventional development patterns.
Billy, this
Yes,
is Vivian.
yes,
Sorry to
Vivian.
interrupt. There seems
Sure.
to be an issue with seeing your screen. It seems like it's zoomed in and only part of the slide is showing. I don't know what you can do to adjust that.
It's showing up as a full screen on mine.
It is showing up.
Well, it's showing up as a full screen. It's top to bottom.
Okay, you know what, everybody? It might be, let's see.
I don't know how I would change that.
Yeah. I've gotten several messages that that's a problem. Okay, I guess we'll just need to continue, but if anybody can send me a chat message on how to adjust that, we'd appreciate it. We haven't had this problem before. Sorry, Billy, go ahead.
Nor have I. On the bottom half of the slide is the traditional community building, which is what we did really before World War II. Someone is saying here to hold control and wheel back with the mouse. That's now putting everything. That's putting a whole lot of slides on the screen now. That doesn't seem to be working. Now I'm back to where I was before. And while people may still choose to drive to where they want to go, there's lots of different ways because there's a dense gridded network of streets and because there are mixed uses. There's lots of different ways to get there, to get around without putting all the pressure onto a limited number of roadway systems. So this is where, from a local government standpoint, we need help in achieving these goals. Likewise, with land development regulations, you can have sidewalks and bike lanes in transit in a location like this, but if the buildings are set way back from the road, people are generally not going to walk in any way, shape, or form. One of the big challenges that we have as it relates to pedestrian safety is the speeds and the fatality rates. When people get hit at only 40 miles an hour, you can see about 90% of the people die. And so that's a big challenge in achieving our goals here at the state in improving bike and head safety. There's a lot of things that we've done over the last 2.5 years. We have a website called alerttodayflorida.com, which you can go to and see all of the things that we've undergone during this time. I'm going to talk primarily about the bike ped policy team. One of the things we realized early on is we couldn't keep doing the same thing we've been doing and expecting different results. So I lead this team, and we meet on a monthly basis, and part of the process is to go through and change the entire way we plan and design projects in a way that's more supportive to bike and peds. So in that realm, we've adopted a complete streets policy back in August. We're in the process now of laying out a plan for how we're going to implement this complete streets policy, and the goal is to use a context-based approach really to the entire street design. I mentioned bike and ped facilities here, but instead of taking a one-size-fits-all where we basically treated a street the same in a rural condition as we do in a compact urban downtown, we're going to be using context as a way to guide our engineers and planners on how to design differently than we have before, because we've got to do that if we're going to really change things. Another thing that we've, well, two more things on the changing the culture change or creating culture change is one is promotion of modern roundabouts, which we know are significantly safer for all users, and then increase the use of road diets on corridors where we have excess capacity. Likewise, we've got to
Billy, again, yeah, sorry. You're still having a significant portion cut off. One person suggested, is it run in the PowerPoint mode or is it run from the slideshow?
It's run in the slideshow mode.
Okay. Is there anything on the view? Let's see. You know, at the top panel, sometimes there's a view.
There is nothing. It's what I'm used to seeing when I do PowerPoint.
Yeah. For some reason, parts of it are cut off for the viewers. Okay, we'll just have to, I apologize, everybody. We'll try to figure this out for our next webinar. Yeah. Thank you, Billy. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I've not had this happen before.
Okay.
And so part of what we've got to do also is that we've got to work on the actual laws. What we realized early on is we're expecting law enforcement and our users to understand their behavior. But if you look at this one definition of a crosswalk, you can see from reading this that it's not something that can be clearly understood. So we've actually submitted changes to the law, which we'll be working on during this upcoming legislative session. And by this time next year, we hope to have all of the laws related to bikes and peds and motorist behavior redefined in a way that they can be understood. In terms of supporting the culture change, we've done lots of training. We've been training in all 7 geographic districts and have trained literally hundreds, and we'll be continuing to do that during this coming year. Again, as it relates to designing for pedestrian safety, we've got to teach our designers and planners how to design differently than they have historically. For the measures that we're using, these are federal highways, proven countermeasures. Across the country, they've seen these as ways to be improving safety from an engineering standpoint, and I'm going to go quickly through these. This is a typical condition where you've got more capacity in this corridor than you need, and in this case, in the city of Asheville, they both did a road diet and installed a modern roundabout at this intersection. So you can see it dramatically changed how this corridor feels, and now people are going to drive much slower, both because the roundabouts reduce the speeds at which people negotiate intersections, and also because the cross-section feels tighter than it did before. We're going to be using mid-block crossings increasingly so that we are, instead of putting them in primarily where we don't see any other solution, we've got to be more aggressive and proactive in using mid-block crossings, because as many of you are aware, sometimes our signals are a mile or a half a mile apart, and we can't expect pedestrians to walk that far across the street. So using marked crosswalks that are accessible, and then using traffic control features. We've got 3 tools that we'll be using: the rectangular rapid flashing beacon, which has proven highly effective, especially in the city of St. Pete, which has lots of experience with them, for 4-lane roadways or narrower. And then for 6-lane roadways, using the pedestrian hybrid beacon or a normal pedestrian signal will be used at these locations in the future. And what I mean when I talk about context, we use the transect zones on the SMART code, which is a non-proprietary code to help to explain to our engineers and planners what we mean when we talk about context. Again, designing for a rural area should be different than in a very urban area. And I'm not going to talk about these slides just to illustrate some of the tools that we'll be using to communicate that to our engineers and planning community so that they have some sense of what we mean when we're talking about these various contexts. Earlier there was discussion about the traditional neighborhood development chapter in the Florida Green Book, which local governments are required to use. This is not a tool that the state uses. We use the Plans Preparation Manual. But as I've shared in over 70 presentations over the last 2 years, our engineers can start looking at this tool as a way to help understand the direction that we're going in terms of designing on the state road system. And as you can see, this is established through the rulemaking process. So the actual Green Book is backed up by Florida law, and then the handbook is intended to provide to be educational and to identify best practices. So when we talk about complete streets and the issue of speed, one of the challenges that we have is that you can take a street like this and have sidewalks and bike lanes on it, but from a pedestrian or bicyclist standpoint, it's really not complete, because the adjacent land development patterns are such that it creates an environment where drivers feel that they can drive fast, comfortably. And so part of what we've got to do to create complete streets is engage local governments and get them on board with changing our land development patterns such that we have on-street parking and buildings at the back of sidewalk. You can see this is a much tighter cross-section, and consequently people drive slow in this environment. This is just an example of a table out of the traditional neighborhood development chapter of the Florida Green Book. Currently, if you were to look at our design guides, basically the 12-foot lane is the standard lane width. We're moving in a direction where we will have 10 feet, 11 feet, and 12 feet that will all be standards on their own right based on the context and the speed that we're trying to achieve on a given corridor, which again we'll be working with local governments. And what we talk about, when I talk about context-based, likewise with bike lanes and sidewalks and streets themselves, our current discussion is that we're going to be looking at context, motor vehicle speed, and motor vehicle volumes as a basis for establishing what type of bike facilities that we're going to provide on any given corridor. And on low speed, on very low speed, low volume roads, we will continue to use sharrows just as we have today. On more moderate speed and more moderate volume roadways, and potentially as well on higher speed roads, our bike lane standard is going from what is currently a 4 or a 5 foot bike lane, depending on whether it's curb and gutter section, to a 7 foot standard. And we'll be able to use this on both new construction and resurfacing or retrofitting projects. And then we have some corridors, and again we'll have to work with local governments on these, where multi-use paths will be providing for the majority of bicyclists who will never be comfortable in the bike lane. And just to give you a couple of examples, or one example, this is a corridor where we could go in and resurface a 6-lane roadway and take 1 foot out of each travel lane and in effect provide a 7-foot bike lane. And so these are the types of standards that we're in the process of working on right now. Again, we need local governments to help us with this. As local governments are redeveloping or building new development, we're seeking them to get on board with creating a dense network of streets, again, so that there's not so much pressure on those limited streets that we have, putting buildings at the back of the sidewalk. A good example of which is Baldwin Park. It has 32 street connections to the adjacent street network. And as a result, there are no 4-lane roadways in Baldwin Park, nor are there any signals. And there's no traffic to speak of because the traffic disperses throughout all these connections. So this is a good example of what it is we're trying to achieve. And as you can see, it has all kinds of amenities in schools so that people don't necessarily have to leave the neighborhood. So when you're looking at redevelopment, here's a good example of a redevelopment project in Winter Park that has residential upstairs and retail and restaurants on the downstairs side. For many, many years we had difficulty getting larger chains to come into these kinds of developments, but now there's been a move. Publix was the first one that I'm aware of. This is a 30,000 square foot Publix on the ground floor of a condo building, and it has no surface parking lot. It shares parking lot space down below with the other retail. And I've recently read that Target and Walmart are both looking at building 15 and 20,000 square foot stores. So there's clearly a market for changing these land development patterns. And this is just an example of how a street can be made complete. This is a project I was project manager on, and you can see that it was there were actually suburban land development patterns being built on this corridor, and this community wanted something different. And so we showed them how we could change the street, but also what they need to do over time, the investors and developers, what they need to do in order for us to complete this street so that it works for everyone and so that cars will drive slower and people will feel more supported and safer in this environment. So this is just one example of a project where what is a relatively higher speed road can be made much slower and safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. And so that's our goal as an agency. And with that, I'm going to transition it over to Amanda Martinez. I'm going to transition this over to Amanda Martinez, who's already been introduced. Thank you.
Amanda, you have yourself muted. I just wanted to let you know that.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. We're not seeing your screen just yet. We're not seeing the webinar, the presentation.
Okay, I hit OK to share it. Okay, can everybody see it now?
No, we can't see the PowerPoint. We have been doing this for 3 years now. We haven't had this issue. Obviously, there's some technical problem going on. Let me go ahead.
There's a couple people saying they can see it. I've seen several comments. People say they can see it.
I'm saying a lot of people that can see it. I can't see the presentation. If anybody, maybe it's some issue on my end. If people cannot see it, can you send a message in? Because all I'm seeing is that people can see it. Okay, it must be some issue on my end, then go ahead. We'll wing it. Thank you.
So again, my name is Amanda Martinez. I'm the Director of Planning and Development Services with the City of Deerfield Beach. And this presentation will be focusing more on the local level creation of the policies and the implementation of those policies and how we started our journey and up to where we are now with implementation. Just 1 second, it's not moving. Okay, so as municipal planners, we look mostly at land use patterns and zoning. And so this is a typical land use pattern in South Florida where you see the residential is separate from the commercial. And more than likely, people are not going to be walking from these single-family homes to the commercial, which you can see what looks like commercial on the right side of the screen, the lower and the top part. So we're dealing with trying to get land use patterns and development, as Billy was discussing, something more like this, where you want walkable communities where people can walk to their services and walk to school possibly. But what we're looking at in South Florida and in Deerfield Beach, we have 3% vacant land. So we're dealing mostly in redevelopment. And that's something that takes longer and really relies on the market and the private sector, and we are working on putting in land use policies in place to entice that type of development. But we wanted to also work on something that was quicker to turn around and easier, so that's when we started looking at the right-of-way, because we can control what's in our right-of-way. So that's when we began in 2012 creating our Complete Streets Guidelines. And we created a Complete Streets Committee, which is a staff committee of kind of the important staff that will be implementing the policies. And this was a key step because it got all the staff on board and on the same page. And we reviewed everything up front, so when it came time to implementation, everybody was okay with the policies that were in the document. And our guidelines are based on the Broward Complete Streets Guidelines, and we revised those each month when we met to be specific to the needs of Deerfield Beach. And the guidelines are a reference tool for the staff to use when we start looking at streets projects, of how we can look at the existing right-of-way we have and how we can redesign that to be more of a complete street. And it sets up the goals, the performance measures, and an implementation plan for these policies. It has 14 chapters. It covers various things such as the design of intersections, pedestrian and bike facilities, and transportation facilities. There's also a land use chapter, traffic calming, replacing streets, and retrofitting suburbia, which is how do you take a built-out suburban area and retrofit it to be complete streets. We also did a lot of data analysis, and we created several GIS maps. This is an example of one of them. It shows crash accidents involving bikes and pedestrian accidents from 2007 to 2012. This is another one showing the bus ridership travel distribution, so how far people are typically walking to and from bus stops. And if you look at this screen, the darker places are higher. It correlates with the previous one showing how many accidents there are. So we're showing more accidents around the bus stops. We also looked at our roadway classifications. The Complete Streets Guidelines set up complete streets classifications into avenue and boulevard. We looked at the descriptions of those. They fit the FDOT classifications of collector and arterial. So we created a map that says this is the FDOT, which is city collector, and complete streets, it's called an avenue. And this was important because the chapters have various sample cross-sections and design treatments for an avenue or a boulevard or a local street. And these are some of the examples from the guidelines showing you have an existing 50-foot avenue. You can restripe it to add bike lanes, or you can also add a median to that to make it a complete street. Another example is a 60-foot wide avenue or a boulevard, and how you can reduce travel lanes and restripe it to fit the bike lanes in. And these are throughout the chapter showing you examples of how you can redesign your streets. We also did extensive community outreach as part of this. We created a survey on the website that asked the residents general questions about their travel behaviors. Like, I would walk or ride a bike more if there were more sidewalks or more shade trees. We collected 200 responses, which isn't a lot for a city of 78,000 residents, but it's more than we've ever had before in any kind of public outreach by just having a public meeting at City Hall. We created a website where we put the survey online for people to fill out. We also went to several events and had paper surveys for people to fill out, and we did a school poster contest with an elementary school. So we asked the kids to draw a street that they enjoy riding or walking their bike on, and we've displayed those at City Hall and had the public vote on them, and the winners were presented with certificates and awards from the Mayor to Commission meeting. And then we took all the posters and displayed them at the Festival of the Arts, where we had a booth for Complete Streets. We adopted the guidelines in 2013, and we adopted them by reference into our transportation element of our comprehensive plan. And then we also added GOPs, goals, objectives, and policies, for complete streets and smart growth into our transportation and future land use elements. And that was in April of 2014. And more recently, we're working on creating a complete streets plan. This will be an actual plan that focuses on specific streets and creates a project list. So then we know what projects we want to do and what treatments to give those streets. So that'll go into our capital improvements plan. And we received a $15,000 grant from DEO to hire a consultant to write this complete streets plan for us. And we were eligible for that grant because we adopted the guidelines into our comprehensive plan, because this was a grant to help cities write a comprehensive plan element or an update to a comprehensive plan. And next, where we're working on right now, is implementation. We don't have any funds dedicated specifically for complete streets projects. So the way we've been doing it is piggybacking on other agencies, specifically FDOT projects. We have a Hillsborough Boulevard scheduled resurfacing project, and another major project is an A1A resurfacing project, both being done by DOT. This is Hillsborough Boulevard existing. The segment we're looking at is it's just east of Dixie Highway all the way down to Federal Highway, and City Hall is just behind that where the American flag is there. So this is kind of our downtown area. This is 6 lanes with a 2-way center turn lane. The speed limit is about 35 miles an hour. There's an elementary school crossing area here. There's about 6 bus stops, a post office, and there's a high pedestrian and bike accident numbers in this area. So when we knew DOT was going to be coming in and doing a resurfacing project in 2016, we wanted to look at getting rid of that 2-way center turn lane and putting in a median. This is the only segment of Hillsborough that doesn't have a median and has this 2-way center turn lane. And so we looked at it and we approached DOT and asked them what would be the procedure for this. And that's when we started the lane elimination application process with FDOT. So this is a rendering of what it will look like after the road diet. We'll be removing the 2 outside lanes and putting in a median. There'll be 4 travel lanes and then buffered bike lanes and enhanced landscaping and shade trees on the outside. This will be done in 2016 when FDOT goes into resurface, and this was just recently approved last month by FDOT. And because DOT is already going in and doing the resurfacing project, they are paying for most of the cost. We didn't have to pay for surveys or design work. That's all being done by DOT. And the Broward MPO also helped pay for some of the improvements. So this, when it's all said and done, the city is paying for landscaping, which is about $360,000, and this project totals almost $1.8 million. So by piggybacking on the FDOT project, this is the only way the city could afford to do this. These are just the typical sections of the existing and what it will be proposed with the buffered bike lanes and the median in the middle. The other project is A1A resurfacing project. A1A is our main road right on the beach area. If anyone's been to Deerfield Beach, along our famous S-curve is where we have most of our commercial activity. There is kind of scattered sidewalks. There's no complete pattern of a sidewalk and no bike lanes, and it's been needed for a very long time. There's high pedestrian activity out there. So we knew that FDOT had this big PD&E study for this area where there's going to be right-of-way acquisition, over $10 million in right-of-way acquisition. So when DOT was looking at resurfacing, they didn't look at adding bike lanes and sidewalks because of the PD&E. They didn't want to put something in that might be torn up down the road. But the PD&E, because it is so much money in right-of-way acquisition, could happen 10 years from now. We don't know how long it could be. So we approached them along with the Broward MPO and said, can we just look at adding bike lanes and sidewalks when you resurface? And they looked at it and said, sure. And they went and they were able to fit bike lanes and sidewalks in throughout the whole corridor of A1A, all within the right-of-way. And that won't be at any cost to the city because it's all being done by FDOT. So this picture shows, you can see sporadic sidewalks throughout the area. So that's my presentation. If anyone needs more details or would like more information on how we've been implementing or creating these policies, feel free to give me a call, send me an email. You can also check out our website on Complete Streets. And next I'll be handing the presentation over to Darla Letourneau from
Hi, this is Darla Letourneau from Bike Walk Lee, and I want to focus on the role of the citizen advocacy in bringing Complete Streets to Florida. And Vivian's going to do my slide. So next page. Vivian?
We
Okay.
seem to be having
Hopefully
problems.
she's going to do the next page.
Yeah, we seem to be, hold on just a moment.
Oh.
I am showing
Okay.
my screen. Are people not seeing it? We seem to be having issues here. I'm trying to figure out what's going on.
I see your screen.
Okay. All right.
It just needs to be moved to the second page. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So Bike-Walk-Lee was formed in 2009 with a Complete Streets mission. And we were one of the early Complete Streets pioneers in Florida. When we started, there were only 3 communities in Florida that had Complete Streets policies, and there were 100 nationwide. And today, there are at least 32 in Florida and 600 nationwide. So people tackling this now will have an easier road, I think. So we're an all-volunteer community coalition. We are not an official 501(c)(3). We have 62 supporter organizations. We don't really have members, but we have over 1,000 people in our network, and we kind of have a unique structure, but it's working for us. Next slide. So there are a couple major keys to our success and our success with the Complete Streets initiatives here. First is we have a wonderful multi-talented steering group, which is really a team. We don't have officers, we're all equals, and we have a very diverse set of backgrounds, different skills and talents, and I think this helps us with our success. And the second part is we have a coalition. Like I said, we had 62 supporter organizations. One of the first things we did when we formed was to seek out established partners in the community, from everybody interested in the Complete Streets mission, from universities to safety experts to health advocates to environmental groups, economic development organizations, and of course bike and pedestrian community, businesses, etc. So when we launched, one of the things we did was recruit a couple of high-profile leaders in our community to stand with us in our launch, to embrace our mission, to give us credibility from the beginning. So that was helpful. And it included AARP of Florida, that was one of our original supporters, which got notice in our community. Next slide. So Complete Streets is really a movement. So it's all about change. It's not really just a policy or a program or a design standard. So it really is a perfect place for advocates because it's about being change agents, being catalysts, coalition builders, all in support of this change. And as I think Billy pointed out, we're in the process of a paradigm shift in transportation from auto-centric to all modes and thinking about all users. So it's also about redefining the problem we're trying to solve. It's not just about how can we move more cars faster. It's not just engineers at the table designing the roads. It's about having planners, environmentalists, community groups, advocates, others in the community at the table to be involved in this process. So it really does help bring communities together with the goal of improving their neighborhoods. Next slide. There is really, nope, back up, sorry. There you go. There are many different ways to approach this, but I've listed 3 what I would call leadership models of how do you start a policy. We started following Miami, first thing we looked at, and it was an elected official initiated Complete Streets policy. Staff initiated, I think, is what you have in Broward County and Deerfield Beach, and advocacy initiated was the approach undertaken in Lee County, Florida with Bike-Walk-Lee. But no matter which way you start, you really have 3 important ingredients for success over the long haul. You need a broad community coalition of support. We kind of brought that to the table at the beginning. You also need internal staff champions, and that's really important when you get to the implementation phase. And you need elected official champions, whether it's at the beginning or when you move to implementation. Next slide. So some of the lessons we've learned in the policy adoption process, there is no best approach. It's very context sensitive. You look for where the opportunities are, the best timing. You know, it's really, you really have your ear close to the ground. We pursued a couple of levels of government simultaneously. We were looking at a policy in the MPO at the same time we were working with the County Board of Commissioners. And then what happens when you have it in one jurisdiction, you're leveraging the success and promoting it in other jurisdictions. So after we had MPO and county policies, we then had Fort Myers City and then Bonita Springs just this fall. So each one is kind of a homegrown, and you really need to have it be grassroots in the sense of what works at that point in time for that community. And it's really key to have the coalition and political support before you move forward with the policy. What you don't want to do is propose and fail. So sometimes you start and realize the timing's not right and you step back. There's also different themes people emphasize. You know, some communities, the focus is on safety. That's easy in Florida because our crash and fatality rates are so high. And that is, I think, the strongest theme overarching everything. And complete streets are safer streets. So that's a very powerful way to start working on safety. Other communities have focused first on health. Some of the money from the feds came from CDC, so there was a health focus. And others have come at it from the sustainability perspective. I think Bonita Springs, it came out of their sustainability strategy. So what really is important is that when you're developing the policy, you have strong implementation components, because that, especially from an advocate's perspective, you need hooks to come back to, because none of these policy resolutions are self-executing. So you need deliverables, you need time frames, timelines, assignments, you need as many kind of next steps built into the resolution as possible. Next slide. So internally, the Lee County Board of County Commissioners, our unincorporated county, did a couple of very innovative things. They started with an internal interdepartmental performance team where they got the staff from these various departments sitting around a table and working together as a team. They also set up an external organization or link with the already existing sustainability committee, and then they created a Complete Streets working group within that committee that Bike Walk Lee played a role in. So this really, if you look at the next slide, you know, when you have silos that aren't used to working together, what was the most effective tool to kind of cut through it, and I think Amanda talked about her experience, a similar thing. It's maps. You get a map up there where you're looking at a street, and we started with resurfacing contracts, basically taking that neighborhood that was going to be resurfaced and using it as an opportunity to look at, you know, on this GIS tool, you know, you could see where the schools and the bus stops were and the homes and everything, and then you could start seeing opportunities for where things needed to be taken care of. And although we could do a few minor improvements during the resurfacing, really what this did was give us a mechanism to start coming up with that identification of what it would take to complete that streets and to prioritize those projects for future CIPs. Next slide. So the easy part is really the policy adoption. The hard part is the implementation, and I think that's especially true for advocate-initiated policy. And like I said, it's really important to have the hooks in the policy so you can have tools to follow up. I think one of the things we were most surprised at was all the heavy lifting ahead to embed Complete Streets policy into the government framework, policy framework. So it's been a 5-year journey that we're still counting, we're still not there yet, of incorporating this into the comprehensive plan amendments, the local development codes, administrative codes, etc. Oops, sorry. My screen disappeared. Did yours? Okay, sorry. Next slide. So it's a constant education process, and you have new players all the time. So here we are. I think all of you know that political change is a given. So you really need to be prepared, think about the worst case scenario and plan for it. It's important to develop relationships across the board. That's also been helpful with a broad coalition. So it's not just our little steering group, it's relationships of other groups at the table. What we did was we developed relationships with what I would call external stars back in 2009 when Secretary Hood was really the national leader on bike and pedestrian, multimodal, complete streets. We hitched our star to him, and our message to our local officials was, clearly the nation's moving in a new direction in transportation. So the locals can either lead or get left behind. Which do you want to do? And of course, leaders want to lead, so we were able to get people committed to kind of join in the movement. Then in 2011, we hitched our star to Secretary Hathaway, who's been a leader in paving the way with our local elected officials about the value of complete streets. And of course, having money helps. I think Amanda mentioned that in terms of FDOT projects. So what you really have to do in this constant political change is you have to learn where you can have the most impact and to always look for where you have the best return on your investment of your resources, always looking for strategic opportunities, and be ready to pivot. It's not easy sometimes, but it's important. Next slide. AARP has a lot of great resources, and I just pulled out one where they picked out 5 kind of roles of advocates, and I want to, in the next series of slides, go through kind of some examples of how we implemented these roles. Next slide. So one of the most important things you can do is encourage people who are involved in it. We've used our communication system extensively. We have a newsletter, a blog, a Facebook, etc., lots of emails. We highlight the positive developments of individuals and organizations. And one of the things that being part of a national movement allows you to do is we can make sure that our good news about what's happening locally gets highlighted in national newsletters and their national reports, and then you share that back with the local elected officials and the staff, and then everybody's a winner because you can see that your work is being recognized, you're part of something bigger, and we're also, that recognition on the national stage lays the work for big things that can happen, such as our Tiger Grant. So that was a very effective way to build momentum and support. We also partnered with the MPO on a winning Complete Streets, Complete Streets Initiative Tiger Grant, which brought in $10 million, and that's really kind of a sign that our 5-year Complete Streets campaign has paid off. So it was really kind of a watershed moment for our community. Next slide. Another role we play is informing. So for the best way for people to get it and become supporters is to experience it firsthand. So we've done 2 things. We invited officials and groups to visit a real complete street on the ground that the Fort Myers Beach had put in motion and kind of without us realizing it. It was a utility project that morphed into this fabulous 1-mile complete streets. So people who have gone there kind of have an aha moment about this is what I want in my community. So that's been very effective. And second, we conducted bike audits about monthly for officials and staff and committees so they can experience firsthand what their decisions and policies have resulted in, so they can see the good, bad, and the ugly of our bike and pedestrian facilities, and that's resulted in some actions by council members and staff. We've also worked to build media support. We've worked with News Press, our largest local paper, from the beginning to have them as partners on safety in particular. They've published our commentaries, done editorials, etc. And then 2 years ago, they invited us to do a biweekly column, which has given us an opportunity to brand our organization, but also really promote and talk about the complete streets. And so I would say in our community that the terminology of complete streets is pretty well understood, which is helpful. Next slide. Tracking. We really want to see how we've done performance, and not just us as an organization, but it's really, we do these annual accomplishments reports, which are really a report card on the whole community on implementation of complete streets, and it's a way of celebrating and sharing the progress, again, with our 62 supporter organizations and the community at large. We also started an annual countywide report on the actual new bike and pedestrian facilities that were there countywide. There was never really a holistic look at what was going on from one jurisdiction to the other. So again, this was a way of celebrating. It was, it got media attention because they could see it in a way that the public was most interested in. It also gave rise to some healthy competition among jurisdictions because you could see if one city was doing a lot more than another. And luckily the MPO staff has taken over the production of this annual report. Next slide. We also celebrate. We instituted an annual Complete Streets Champion of the Year award. We've had 4 so far, and we're getting ready to do a 5th. And those are an opportunity for us to often recognize a team. It's like the elected officials, the staff, the advocates who work together as a team, or it could be one individual. But we do a ceremony at City Hall. We do press releases, and we really use this to, again, continue the momentum, celebrate, and especially encourage the teamwork that's required to make this a reality. Next slide. We also play a role of the watchdog, and we participate in lots of committee meetings, attend lots of public meetings and hearings, and speak. We do lots of reports, recommendations to elected officials, and we really participate in the process. We do our homework, we provide sweat equity, and we are a player. We also, although we emphasize kudos, positives, we don't shy away from highlighting problems. And one of our members has a column in another paper biweekly, and he highlights what he calls streets of shame. So we do try to make sure the good and the bad and the ugly are out there. Next slide. There are lots of national resources, and I've just listed a few on this slide, and it's truly amazing the resources out there to help you on your journey. Not only websites and newsletters and blogs, but I really encourage people to participate in webinars, and the Alliance for Biking and Walking has great mutual aid calls. There are really valuable. There are national conferences, there are listservs. You can't go wrong with all the resources. Last slide. And this is just how you can find out more about Bike Walk Lee. So thank you, and I would like to introduce Laura Cantwell from AARP of Florida.
Good afternoon. It is great to be here today and to hear about all of the work that is happening across Florida. I will be discussing AARP's broader Livable Communities agenda, specifically around our Complete Streets work and trends for the 50-plus population in Florida, and I will go over some of our online resources. So AARP defines a livable community as a place where affordable and appropriate housing, supportive community services, and adequate mobility options which facilitate personal independence and the engagement of residents in civil and social life are available. AARP's livable community work generally takes place at the local level, but we do work closely with key partners, organizations, citizen activists, and local governments at the national and state level. As you are all aware, the demographics across the U.S. are changing and have been for the last 4 years. As recently as 2010, people ages 65 and older represented 13% of the population. But by 2030, those older adults will represent 20% of the population, more than doubling a number from 35 million to over 72 million. This chart shows the growth of the aging population nationally. The first of the baby boomers turned 65 in 2011, but let's look a little bit more specifically at the Florida numbers. Recently, AARP released a longevity economy report, which we worked on with Oxford Economics. This graphic was used to show the percentage of the population over 50 plus in each county. Interestingly, Florida's legend is different than the other states because our state is so much older that the legend in other states goes below 25%, as they have counties with less than 25% of the population over 50, and Florida does not. Also, when looking at other states, not every state grows like Florida, as you see here. By 2040, our 50 population will grow by 40%. Not only does Florida have a large number of older adults, but they are positively contributing to the economy. Despite being 39% of Florida's population in 2013, the total economic contribution of those 50 plus accounted for 54% of Florida's GDP. That supported Florida's jobs, employee compensation, and state taxes, as you can see here. People over 50 are also making a significant contribution to Florida's workforce. 62% of people 50 to 64 are employed, and overall people over 50 represent 34% of Florida's workforce. And not only are older adults working in Florida, but they contribute 54 million in annual volunteer hours. Additionally, 354,000 grandparents live with their grandchildren, and 45% are primary caregivers. So we've gone over the positives of an aging community, but these are some of the costs. Not only are people aging, but they are living longer. Unfortunately, they are living longer with chronic conditions. 75% of 65 plus population have one or more chronic conditions. These conditions can affect many aspects of mobility, from transportation to getting out of bed to walking upstairs to simply taking milk out of the fridge. And all of these are mobility concerns. I know that Billy went over the Dangerous by Design report and discussed that higher speeds leads to higher fatality rates and the need to make roads safer for pedestrians. This is an important issue to our members as they tend to be the ones most impacted. If an older adult is in an accident, it is more likely to lead to a fatality. Older persons account for 1 in every 5 pedestrian fatalities, and that is why this issue is so important for state, federal, and community leaders to focus on in making our streets safer, which will benefit not only the older adults but the whole population. Now that we have gone over the demographics, I'm going to discuss some of the demographic trends that are impacting community and mobility needs. We have recently updated an AARP survey that is literally hot off the press as it hasn't been released yet, that was conducted of the 45 plus population. Participants were asked to respond to key statements. Over 3/4 of the 45 plus want to stay in their current residence for as long as possible, and for the 65 plus that number is 88%. This has been consistent over the last number of years. We did the survey before in 2004, and as a side note, although older adults want to remain in their homes, most houses are built for 35-year-olds. This same research shows that people want to stay in their community. Since 1990, roughly 90% of older Americans have stayed in the county they've been living in, if not the very same home. And the same is true for those 45 plus. If they can't remain in their current home, they at least want to remain in their local community. And why? They want to be close to family and friends, as well as community services. In another survey, we asked about what amenities older adults wanted close to home. AARP's Public Policy Institute surveyed more than 4,500 people ages 50 and older through a series of questions about their preferred community characteristics. And they found that older adults want to be close to bus stops, grocery stores, the park, drug stores. At the end of the day, older adults just want to be able to get around easily. And speaking of mobility and going to amenities, projections show that 1 in 5 drivers will be over 65 by 2025. So having safe, accessible streets are not only necessary of people who can't drive, but of those that don't want to drive, such as millennials and boomers. There are a lot of similarities between the two generations. First, both millennials and boomers are the two largest generations in the nation's history. The boomers currently estimated at 77 million, and the millennials are estimated at 78 million. And both generations prefer living closer to work and driving less. They value improving their existing communities. And this is where Complete Streets is so important as well, because Complete Streets make these communities more desirable for older adults and for younger adults as well. Roads that are more friendly to all forms of transit is good for businesses. Think of places people like to be, restaurants, museums, art galleries, theater. Multiple forms of transportation are needed to accomplish this feeling. So now I want to go over some of the programs that we have at AARP. I'm going to come back a little bit and talk about the Complete Streets and Walk audit portion, but these are some of the other programs we're doing at a national level. Through our Home Fit workshops, we're talking about some more housing issues and how to keep people in their home. And then through our AARP's network of age-friendly communities, we're looking at how cities and counties can work to make their whole area more age-friendly. And our volunteers support our work here in Florida by being key leads in the communities. We have staff and volunteers who primarily work in 6 areas of the state, which include Tallahassee, Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa Bay, Broward, and Miami-Dade. I wanted to go over some of the work that we have done recently. You'll see here for the Lyons Road Walk audit, our Broward volunteers participated in several audits, and this is one they did on October 7th, which was led by the Urban Health Partnership and participation with the county's Metropolitan Planning Organization. And then I also have the Aging in Place checklist. I sit on the Safe Mobility for Life Coalition, which is led by the Florida Department of Transportation, along with FSU's Pepper Institute and Aging and Public Policy. And this coalition is broad-based. It's made up of people from universities, law enforcement, state departments, and we are working to improve the safety and access and mobility of Florida's aging population. And recently, we just released an Aging in Place checklist, and the checklist helps you determine if your community has features and services that help you age in place, specifically looking at some of these mobility issues. And you can find all the resources for that coalition at www.flsams.org. And there's also links to a lot of Complete Streets information at the state level there too. So national resources, we released in March of 2014 along with Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Coalition, this Complete Streets in the Southeast Toolkit. And the toolkit walks you through the process of working on Complete Streets. It provides information on building support. It links you to locally created educational resources for the southeastern states, provides you with sample letters to the editor, and shows you some sample implementation plans and lessons learned, which I know Darla talked about earlier, such a key component. It also has fact sheets and case studies where you can find resources on livable websites, and they have links that shows you videos as well. And if you go to AARP's website to pull down this toolkit, they also have pulled out some of those case studies. For example, you can specifically look at Cobb County in Georgia, and then you can look at some more policy links up to Smart Growth America and National Complete Streets Coalition. Another new resource that AARP has put out is our 11 fact sheets, which are meant to help provide you with a background on key issues. They dispel myths and provide examples of best practices to follow and examples of success stories. They provide a good understanding of the different issues and recommendations, and they highlight, as I have here, success stories, how to get it right. This picture is actually from the bicycling fact sheet, and it is a path of New Smyrna Beach that is part of Volusia County's plan to link schools, parks, and businesses through interconnected paths. Florida also shows up in some of the other fact sheets on economic development, modern roundabouts, road diets, and traffic calming fact sheets. And the other fact sheets deal with density, form-based code, parking, revitalization without displacement, sidewalks, and street trees. And you can either download those separately or as one document. The AARP Public Policy Institute is also developing a web-based tool, the Livability Index, that will incorporate mapping technology, preference survey results, quantitative measures, and public policies to assess the livability of communities. So as you can see here, it shows that the community is getting a rating like 56 as a livable community. This tool will have nationally available data to measure several essential attributes of livability and will help engage with stakeholders. This is based on the document that was released in April 2014, What is Livable Community Preferences of Older Adults, that I went over the data earlier, and the actual toolkit should be available in April 2015. So where can you find all these resources? As I mentioned earlier, Darla said too, AARP has a website. It's aarp.org/livable, and the website is pretty easy to understand. It's in plain language and easy to access. It's meant for elected officials, professional staff, and citizen activists. It has the latest information on livable community issues and topics, plans from states and communities, and guidance on how to implement and fund local initiatives. It also includes toolkits such as the Southeastern Complete Streets Toolkit, the fact sheets that I went over, and reports and resources from a wide range of sources. When you go to the website, you can specifically go to the mobility section for all of our research related to complete streets and safe streets. In addition to this, the Livable Communities team also has slideshows and 5-question interviews with related leaders, and they provide pretty concise livable how-tos to share best practices and lessons learned. And there's also a blog where you can see the address here that has live news that you can follow, and you can also sign up to receive the newsletter, which is monthly and it's free, and it keeps you up to date with everything that's happening across the nation on livable community issues. So my contact information is here as well. If you have any questions about the research I went over or the AARP's website, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I can provide you with some more information. Thank you very much.
This is Vivian. I want to say thank you to all of our presenters, and I apologize again for the visual problems. We've had audio problems in the past. Now we'll have to go up and check on the visual problems. I wanted to remind you that this webinar has been approved for professional certification credits. The way that we track participation is if the individual registers for the webinar. So you do need to be registered as an individual to be able to apply for those credits for us to have a track record of it. Again, for those who came in a little bit late, the PowerPoint is loaded on our website. It's called Planning for Complete Streets in Florida, obviously, but it's at 1000friendsoflorida.org underneath the What's New column. And again, if you have audio problems, especially during the question and answer period when everybody is on, the easiest way to cut back on feedback problems is to adjust the speaker, on your personal computer, and that helps to mitigate it. There's also an audio button that you can adjust as well if you want to work with that. Final reminder for questions. On your control panel, there is a chat box, and you click on it to maximize, and you can ask your questions here. We will answer as many questions as possible, time permitting. Again, a final reminder on upcoming webinars. The one next month is on planning for greenways on December 10th, and registration is now open. We also have planning for sea level rise in January. Victor Dover of Dover Coal is going to be speaking in February, and our annual Florida Legislative Update is going to be in March. As we are a not-for-profit organization, we do appreciate your support and donations, and we encourage you to consider making a contribution to us. I have unmuted all of the speakers now, so we'll start asking the questions, and I encourage you to message in any questions you have. The first question, the biggest issue I have seen is a lack of landscape feasibility integration in the planning process, conflicts with overhead and underground utilities, FDOT requirements, etc. Any comments or input on the panel on these issues? Maybe Billy, could you talk from FDOT's perspective?
Sure. We understand that landscaping and streetscaping is important, and part of the goal with this new context-based approach is to have more flexibility and where landscaping is provided, because we recognize that walkers need shade, and so we're working with our state landscape architecture in this coming year as we move towards this context-based approach to street design.
Does anybody else have any issues that they'd like to talk about that from an implementation standpoint? Okay. How do the Florida Green Book standards relate to locally adopted street design standards? Again, Billy, this would probably be best for you.
Sure. By law, local governments are required to use the Florida Green Book unless they adopt their own standards, but they cannot use standards that are lower than the Florida Green Book, if I remember correctly. Again, this is in statute.
Okay. Can you discuss the type of applications where physical bike barriers can improve safety as well as the usage of bike lanes? And again, Billy, maybe you could start, and I don't know if Amanda and Darla have anything to add on that.
One of the things that we're looking at as part of this context-based approach is looking at how we can incorporate the NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials. They put together a guide that has a lot of treatments that we have historically not used, and we're looking at which ones make sense for us. Certainly protected or separated, physically separated bike lanes is something that we're going to be looking into this coming year. And this Federal Highway has got research that's supposed to be finished now in March that will talk about the safety implications of cycle tracks, which is what they're known as. One of the challenges that we have is if you go to the cities that have successful cycle tracks like Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C. and Vancouver and Portland, is that most of their streets and blocks where these cycle tracks are located are in the more compact urban environment in the cities, and they don't have street-loaded driveways. Their driveways are alley-loaded, and so a cycle track is not going to work as well when you have a lot of driveways along the street edge, whereas if you have the access from the back, then you don't have as many issues.
Okay. Amanda, do you have any experience of that in Deerfield Beach?
No, we haven't been looking at cycle tracks at this point.
Okay. And Darla, any experience in your community?
Not yet.
Okay. How does the community address the competing need for slower traffic and maintaining the traffic levels of service? And again, maybe Billy followed by Amanda.
Well, I think that, as we're looking at redevelopment in the corridors in Southwest Florida, where I do business primarily, one of the discussions that we have to have with local government is, is there a possibility that you would accept a higher level of congestion? Because if you're going to reduce street widths, to get the speeds down, which many times can involve actually reducing the numbers of lanes, then there's going to be typically some increase in traffic congestion. And so that's a trade-off that we always have to work on with local governments in order to get there. And you know, some corridors are very, very difficult to get speeds down on, such as the incomplete street I showed in my slideshow.
Okay. Amanda, do you have anything to add on that? Has there been any issue with the issue of slower traffic and more congestion?
Yes, we actually looked at that as part of our lane elimination application with FDOT. We had to show the level of service. So we hired a consultant to run the models and do all the traffic studies to show that if we reduced the 2 lanes, it did still meet the same level of service. And the speed limit was already posted at 35 for this area, which made it a lot easier. If it was posted at 45 or 50, it would have been much more of a process to look at that speed limit. But we hired a consultant to handle all that for us, and I think that's what helped us move forward in getting the project approved by FDOT.
Darla, has that been an issue or a concern for you all?
It's been a concern. I'm not sure we've had a specific case where we've applied it. I mean, it's just it's a trade-off question, but we're working on that because we think that, you know, the speeds need to be reduced. We would like to see a change in kind of the use of level of service as the measure for making these decisions.
Okay. Another question, to what extent, if any, has there been any opposition to complete streets? Maybe Amanda, you could start, and then Darla, and then maybe Billy?
Well, our biggest opposition was when we were looking at the lane elimination, and it's the fear of causing traffic congestion, and that taking those 2 lanes away would make it much harder for people to get to work or get to their house. So that's been our biggest issue, but we were able to, in that case, show that when the studies were done, it showed maybe 2 or 3 seconds additional time over, and that took into the projection of the build-out, because this area is mostly built out, so it's not going to change much. So that's how we got around that issue. But people generally support the concept of making the streets safer for pedestrians and bicyclists.
Right, and I would say there hasn't been any organized opposition. I mean, part of it is educational. At the beginning, there were issues raised about they were afraid it was a one-size-fits-all. We had to convince people that it didn't mean the same thing in a rural area that it did in an urban area. So the quicker you can get to practical examples, and you know, the review of the resurfacing streets kind of made it more real, so that fear is not out there. There's also a fear of oh, it's going to cost more money. But again, we integrated it into other projects that were being done, so there really hasn't been like oh my gosh, you've just created a $50 million new program you want us to fund. So I would say it really hasn't been opposition, and the safety message is really part of it, and once they see actual examples on the ground of what it looks like, I think some of that is, some of the fears go away. We have not yet done a major road diet. We've done what I call preemptive road diets, which is in the design phase, instead of designing something to be 4 lanes, backing off and saying we want to make this a complete street, let's have a, you know, a 3-lane with a turn lane and bike and pedestrian facilities and medians and all the right things. And it's easier when you're doing it before the road is built than it is after you're in a retrofit. So we haven't done a retrofit yet.
Okay. What about law enforcement? Are they, do they play any role in this issue? Are they supportive? Do they have concerns about it? Billy, maybe you could start off with that.
Sure. I didn't go into a lot of discussion about the what we're doing to drive change, but one of the efforts that we're involved with is the Bike Ped Coalition, where we meet quarterly. And we're working with a lot of our sister agencies, but two of the organizations we're working with is the Florida Police Chiefs Association and Florida Association of Sheriffs. And we're getting tremendous support from both of them on this direction that we're going in, but they're also working with us on dealing with the existing safety problems. And by and large, we're not seeing a real challenge there. The bigger challenge comes in when folks at the local level want to control the speed on a corridor just with law enforcement, and that's very politically and practically speaking, that's very difficult to do.
Amanda, has that been an issue in Deerfield Beach?
No, we've worked with fire and police when it comes to the guidelines, and they went through it and reviewed it. The only thing comes with fire is the traffic calming. That's when they really get involved. And then with our lane elimination, we had that approved by them as well because they do have a police station right off of that main road. But they've worked with us on all of our projects.
Okay, Darla, any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, they have not really they weren't really engaged in the design issues or the policy. As Amanda said, you know, the fire department gets involved like on the design of the Estero Boulevard project where, you know, they want to retain a lane. So there's been some friction or, you know, kind of, there's a weighing of trade-offs about, you know, emergency response and having the kind of complete street that you want.
Okay. We have a question about local communities that have good development standards for complete street policies, and I know Deerfield Beach has that. Are there, Billy, perhaps, are there other communities that have standards on the book that could be models for others to look at?
That's a good question. We have someone in our central office, Dwayne Carver, who's our new state bike ped coordinator, and he's been doing a lot of data gathering on complete streets and implementation. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know specifically who has the best policy and implementation plan in place at this point.
Does anyone else? Does anyone else have?
Lots of places have policies, but the policy won't get you there, as Darla mentioned earlier and Amanda mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Darla or Amanda, any thoughts on that?
We would be interested in knowing what that community is.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess if any of our listeners know anything about it, please share it with us, and we'll share it with everybody else. We've had, let me see. The example of the 7-foot bike line did not include a buffer. Do you consider that in a design understanding that wide bike lanes and paths may be confused by drivers as an additional lane, or they may take it over if simply one larger bike lane?
Actually, the illustration that I showed had a double line, and if I remember correctly, it's about 2 feet wide.
Okay. So it might just been not showing up. This is an education question, and maybe Laura and Darla could, and Amanda as well. How can we do a better job with educating the general public about the benefits of complete streets? We do a great job in preaching to the choir, but our car-centric population will tend to be resistant without better upfront information. I particularly enjoyed the correlation of the benefits as they relate to both older and younger populations in the AARP presentation. Laura, does the AARP site have any information with talking points and reasons why the general public should support complete streets?
Yes, and that's a great question. That's kind of what drove developing our Livable Communities website as well, is to bring this information so it's easier to get out to the general public and it's understandable, and that you can share, you know, when you're going to different events or meetings. And we have, you know, a lot of sheets that you can print off that are really meant as educational tools. So I agree with you. I think we need to have more webinars and more events like this when we can talk to people that, you know, may not be as familiar with the livable community concept and complete streets.
Darla, do you have any thoughts about how you've reached out?
Yeah, I would just add that there's nothing like people going to see a complete streets and experiencing it firsthand. And if you don't have it in your community, get in a car or a bus or whatever and check out another community, because that's when the light bulbs go off about the possibilities. And so we started dealing with the communities that were developing their community plans, which are within the incorporated, unincorporated county, and they were really wrestling with, streets in their neighborhood, so they could go look at another neighborhood and go, yeah, that would work here on this road, okay? So it really, we had a walking audit with the community. There was a slide in there in the Tice community, and Billy was part of that. We brought in the PPS national team. We got a technical assistance grant and got a lot of good publicity around it. I mean, once you empower the community, the neighborhood, okay, start at the neighborhood level and have them use the tools to re-envision what their neighborhood streets could look like, and that's the power of complete streets. It's the lower you go on the grassroots, the better it is to kind of, the education makes it real.
Amanda, in Deerfield Beach, since it was more of a public sector initiated effort, was it a big job to convince citizens that this was a good thing, or were they pretty much on board with it? I know you did a lot of outreach with them.
Like I said earlier, the only resistance was just the traffic congestion in terms of the lane elimination, but anything that didn't involve a lane elimination, people were on board for that. There was no issues with it. We went out and we showed them the pictures of what it could look like and how we could fit it in there within the right-of-way, and they were all generally supportive of it.
Okay, great. We are getting a number of examples here about Fort Lauderdale having a complete streets policy, and they're willing to share. Jacksonville having an ordinance requiring new street design standards for urban, suburban, and rural areas. If any of you do have links to those, please send them in to me at vyoung@1000fof.org, and I'll be happy to share them with all the participants today. One of the earlier questions, and they're going by so quickly I'm missing some of them, is that are any of you willing to go to communities and speak about complete streets? So I don't mean to put you on the spot. I imagine, Billy, that is something that somebody from your office would probably be willing to do, and I don't know about anybody else. Maybe Laura has the ability for that as well. Anyone want to share thoughts on that? Billy says he's muted. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go, Billy. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, I got disconnected. I'm not sure I was able to answer the question about the buffered bike lane. The lane that was actually illustrated in that slide is buffered with about a 2-foot double line. But getting back to your question about speaking, as long as I can fit it into my schedule, I've been willing to attend meetings all over the state and continue to do so.
Okay. Laura, is that something that AARP has ability to do?
Yes, absolutely. We have volunteers throughout the state and staff as well.
Okay, and Amanda and Darla, I know there's some citizen groups that meet on a regional basis. Is that the best avenue for getting speakers in to talk about local examples, or what other suggestions would you have for people who want somebody to come in and, speak to their city commission or a citizen group about how to get started?
Well, this is Amanda. I've done several conferences, so I've been to conferences over the past couple of years and done presentations on this. In terms of just a local group, I do that here. I go to HOA meetings. I go to Broward MPO meetings. So maybe if there's an MPO that's active in complete streets in that region, or maybe DOT, like Billy said, they might have someone locally as well.
Okay.
Yes, and our Complete Streets team and the Lee County Administration has done presentations at conferences, and when other communities, they went to Broward to do a presentation. We've done presentations more locally, more regionally, so we're we have a slightly different setup, but we're available to consult. People call us, email us. We're happy to share what we've learned.
Okay, well, we're running out of time here. I wanted to thank each of you for presenting. You all did a really outstanding job of covering this issue, which is really growing in importance in Florida, especially with the ranking of #1 in pedestrian deaths. It really shows the critical need for it, plus the aging population. Both make compelling reasons why communities should address this. Charles, turn it over to you for any concluding thoughts, but I'd just like to thank all of our speakers for their outstanding job.
Well, thank you, and thank them. This was an excellent program. I don't have anything to add, but I think there was a lot of good information, and of course we want to remind people to follow up on the website if they'd like some of the details and the contact information for all our speakers.
And we are sending out a brief survey after the webinar, so if you get a link to that, please take a few minutes and give us feedback. We do adjust our content and our technical issues based on that, and we will be working on what went wrong with the visual end this time. Thank you again, everybody, for participating, and we hope to see you next month at our December webinar on greenways. Thank you.